Hello and welcome back to another episode of Political Agenda with me, PJ Thumb. Political Agenda is brought to you by New Narrative, newnarrative.com. I am wearing a brown and yellow batik shirt, sitting in front of a map of Southeast Asia with two other people, and we're behind a black table. We have a fantastic episode for you today. Teo Yisheng of Heckin Unicorn is here to talk about the business side of activism. But first, as always, if you like what we do, please do join or subscribe to New Narrative. We are entirely supported by members, and we desperately need your support. So go to newnarrative.com/join to join as a member, or to newnarrative.com/donate to donate. And now, Subash.
Stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna go? This is utopia. Please stay where you are. We've come way too far.
Okay, so joining me as always on Political Agenda, my co-host Sean Francis Han, Editor-in-Chief of Wake Up Singapore. How are you today, Sean?
Hey, I'm good. Yeah, very glad to get into this episode because I've been following them for a while, right? Checking out their clapbacks, the content, the memes, and the nice little illustrations. So I'm really quite keen to get into this one. But before all of that, I'm wearing a striped t-shirt and my pronouns are he, him.
Oh, I forgot to mention my pronouns. They're also he, him.
Yeah. All right. So, Yisheng, before we kick anything off, why don't you tell us what you're wearing, what your pronouns are?
Hi, I'm Yisheng. I am wearing a short sleeve shirt with floral prints. My pronouns are he, him.
All right. Okay, so let's just jump right into it, right? Who are you? And what made you get into this?
Right.
And also, what is Heckin Unicorn for
Yeah.
our audience who don't know yet?
I will start with myself first.
Mm-hmm.
So, I am a nerd, quite a nerd. I love physics in school.
Mm-hmm.
I think physics is one of the coolest subjects, coolest topics ever. I love playing video games.
Mm-hmm.
I studied accounting in NUS,
Mm-hmm.
so quite the nerd. But in my career, before I did Heckin Unicorn full-time, I was a UX designer, so
Oh.
user experience designer at tech startups.
Okay.
So design has been my hobby, even while I was in school.
Mhm.
And before graduation, I kind of decided that I'm just not going to be an accountant.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do design, which is kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked in a couple of tech startups as a UX designer,
Mm-hmm.
designing like software products. And now, since March 2020, I have quit my full-time job and I'm working on Heckin Unicorn full-time.
Okay, but how did you get into that? What made you make
Right.
that jump?
So Heckin Unicorn started as like a side project. There were a few things that kind of kick-started it. So a couple of years ago, while I was still in uni, there was like an exchange program of sorts. There was an entrepreneurship program
Yeah.
that I signed up for. At the end, there was an exchange. We went to San Francisco. And so I was walking around the Castro, which is like the gay district. I was so excited. And I went into like shops and I wanted to buy something cute back home. But I was kind of disappointed because I saw like the designs are just rainbow flags in different shapes.
Yeah.
So tote bags, or like a triangle pin, or a round pin,
Right.
or a square pin. And I just felt kind of disappointed. Like, I thought the queer community is supposed to be more creative. But so all I got was like, okay, it's just rainbow. Like, this can't be it. So that was kind of one of the factors that made me want to create or design something that's a bit different, a bit cuter, a bit more like special than just rainbow. So that was kind of at the back of my mind
Yeah.
a few years back. Another thing that kind of like motivated me to do Heckin Unicorn is the sort of privilege that I have. So because some context, I am completely out as a gay man. I forgot to mention I'm gay, by the way. I am completely publicly out as a gay man. My brother is also gay. My mom is super supportive.
Oh, that's
So my whole family is like supportive. My friends are supportive. My classmates in uni were supportive. In every company I've worked in, my colleagues were supportive. So I know it's rare. Like I I know enough gay people to know that this is not the norm. That someone can be so accepted in almost all touch points in life. Of course, that's straight people get that all the time, but LGBTQ people don't get that. So I know that there's a sort of like privilege that I have. And at the back of my mind, I've been thinking about how I could use that to help other people who are a bit more closeted, who are not as comfortable, or who live in like slightly more unsafe environment. What can I do to help them? And so these two things kind of like came together in the form of Heckin Unicorn. It's not like an elaborate plan. It just happened. So I was just doodling, drawing stuff, and I was thinking about what kind of cute pins or cute drawings I could come up with that are like queer. And the unicorn was the first thing. And the unicorn, it has been kind of an unofficial symbol for like gay pride or LGBT pride. I actually don't really know why, but it just has been. And so the unicorn is highly associated with LGBTQ identities or movements. So the unicorn was naturally one of the first things that I drew. And somehow I just decided to make pins because I checked the cost. It was all right. I have been working for a few years back then, so like I had enough savings to kind of like make a bulk order. So I just went with that. And so that was how the first batch of pins came about. It was just, I designed some cute stuff. I think it's cute. It's LGBT related because that's what I wanted to create. And I started selling online. And I started on Carousel. And the response was a lot better than I expected. And over the years, it has been around 2 years, it just grew into a business. So that's kind of how Heckin Unicorn came about. It wasn't like an elaborate plan. It just, like, I just made it, the pins I mean. And it became well received, and I was like, oh shit, I should make more. And then it just slowly grew from there.
So I wanna kind of get into what Heckin Unicorn is, because right now it's a business. You have a blog, you have a library even, and then you have those things that I am primarily familiar with Heckin Unicorn for, which is the memes, right? Which is the clapbacks where you point out really ridiculous and bizarre logics that appear in people who are very reactionary or who are not queer affirming. So what exactly is Heckin Unicorn? If you could locate the essence of it for us.
Heckin Unicorn is a queer brand in Singapore, based in Singapore.
Oh yeah.
That's the most summarized version I could give.
Okay.
To elaborate a bit more in terms of like, it's a queer brand, so we are mainly a business. We sell products, enamel pins, notebooks, socks. I think that's it.
Okay. I mean that's quite interesting. But why a business though?
Right.
Yeah.
So the context for Heckin Unicorn is that it kind of started out as a business because I was creating products and I was trying to sell them. I was trying to see, hey, do people in Singapore want to buy something that is LGBTQ? The designs are a bit more subtle, so not just like rainbow flags all around. And I was curious whether there's a demand for that. So right from the start, it was like a business. It was never like, oh, I'm going to create change, or like, this is going to be something big. No, it was just like, I designed these cute pins. Does anyone want to buy it? So it started from there. And the response was kind of overwhelming because I just wasn't expecting. I was expecting to lose my money in the first batch. So it kind of grew out of like proportion in terms of like my expectations. And so it got to a point where I think it's just natural for me as well. Like as the account grew, and I'm quite vocal about bullshit, especially when it comes to like LGBTQ issues in Singapore. So naturally that just happened. Like,
so do you do the writing for those memes? Oh, nice.
So okay,
Is it just you?
it's just me. That's what
Everything on the site.
everything. So
Oh,
I always say
wow.
we. When even when I use the account to share stuff, I always say we. But it's just me. It's just me.
Wow.
So I do everything. Of course, my brother helps sometimes. My friends help to read to check for grammar and
Yeah.
stuff sometimes, but most of the stuff is just me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what are the struggles and kind of personal costs
Right.
associated with running such a business?
Right.
Especially you started in the, you probably didn't realize at the time, in the middle of a pandemic.
Mm.
So I guess it's also what made you decide transition full time, and the trade-offs, right? You were giving up a pretty secure career to switch to what is inherently far more risky, running your own business.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the context, I guess, is that when I quit in March last year, Heckin Unicorn has already been around for a year. So it wasn't as if around a year ish. So it wasn't as if I started it for a couple of months and decided I'm just gonna do this. And I'm quite risk averse. So what I did was essentially look at my bank account. I did the numbers. I'm an accountant. I did the numbers, and I figured that I have enough money to last me for a year. If Heckin Unicorn totally doesn't work out, and if I earn nothing from it, and then I decided, okay, maybe I should do this. And so there were a couple of reasons why I considered doing it full time. One of them was that I realized that I was getting a bit too stretched. So before that,
Yeah.
because I have a full-time job, Heckin Unicorn was essentially my after work and weekend time. So everything else, whenever I'm free, I'll be doing Heckin Unicorn, packing orders, planning the social media stuff, designing like the comics and stuff. So it has got to a point where I was kind of overwhelmed, and it's a good problem because like the orders became enough that I start getting stressed about having to pack the orders. And then I decided that, okay, I want to see how far I can push this. And I want to see whether this will work, especially in Singapore, because I don't think there are that many other brands that are just like, hey, we are queer. And that's all. Like, we're not even going to hide the fact that we are queer.
Yeah.
So I just want to see how far I could push it. And I felt like I was reaching a point where I was being held back because I have a full-time job.
Yeah, I totally hear you, man. I mean, I have two jobs. I'm an academic at Oxford, and I run New Narrative, and it's just it's exhausting. One of the things I'm going to do this year is really shift my focus from being an academic to really trying to run New Narrative more full time. But unlike you, I have employees who count on me, so it's really, it's not just stretched, but I feel guilty for not giving them the time that they deserve for when they're putting in so much effort. They're all full time, working so hard, and then I'm half of the time like mentally somewhere else, right? So I totally feel you. That is a really tough position to be in, and yet for me, of course, I'm afraid to take the plunge and go totally full time on New Narrative, because it's ultimately I have a job, and New Narrative doesn't earn enough to pay me. I haven't drawn a salary from New Narrative in 3 years. But you had reached a point where you were actually making enough money, you thought?
I was not.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't. I actually, when I quit, I wasn't making enough to cover my monthly expenditure, or
Right.
like what I was drawing from my full-time job. So when I quit, it wasn't looking good.
Okay.
Wait, so were you profitable? Or
I was.
You were profitable, but
It-
you weren't anywhere near what was enough to cover your living expenses.
Yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't as if I reached a point where, fuck it, like I can. Oh, sorry, can I?
Yeah.
It's not like I reached a point where I don't need my job.
Yeah.
I kind of needed that, but I decided to like give it a try.
Yeah.
And I quit before COVID became a problem. By the time I noticed it was March, where it was full blown.
Yeah.
And I kind of panicked a bit. But it was all right. Like, it turned
How
out
did that
fine.
play out though? Because I remember seeing that during the pandemic, online sales increased. So did it positively affect your business?
It did. I think in the beginning, people were a bit afraid, or they were a bit shocked. And so the sales kind of dipped a bit. But after a while, people kind of got used to the fact that they're going to be at home. They can't go out.
Yeah.
And so they have to shop online. And I think that might have helped a bit because everyone was just more willing to spend online. Not only Singapore, because we're selling to other countries as well, all over the world. And so the demand has been pretty good from overseas. So in a kind of twisted way, COVID might have helped a bit. Although there were also certain things like physical events I couldn't attend and stuff like that. So, yeah.
So what are some of the big struggles and personal costs that come with running your own business, especially an LGBTQIA business? Yeah.
There are a couple.
All right, let's hear them.
So one of the first things that comes to my mind is the fact that a lot of my ads and products on Facebook will get rejected.
Wait, why?
Okay, so
I thought they were like LGBTQ friendly, right? They had the rainbow reactions,
right.
or they
so,
had the
so I think so this is what I think is happening. Again, Facebook is being very vague with the description. So whenever my products or ads get rejected, they will say that it goes against community guidelines or community standards. And I've read it a couple of times because they have told me that enough that I went to check it out. And I'm pretty sure that it did not go against standards. So I think what happened, and again, because I worked at a few tech startups, so I'm kind of familiar with how these kind of things might work. What might have happened is that people who are not supportive of LGBTQ identities, when they see the ad, they're not happy, right?
Yeah.
And they will flag it.
Yeah.
And the closest thing they could find, because you can't flag something as I don't like this sexual orientation.
Yeah.
So the closest thing they could find is that it's sexual in nature.
Right.
And so they flag it as sexual.
Okay.
And then if enough people flag it, Facebook might automatically take it down.
It's a bit of an irony flagging a unicorn as sexual content, right? Okay, but right.
I mean, New Narrative has a similar problem. For some of our ads, they're rejected with no real explanation. But because of who we are, we do have to say that, do you have to check the box that says this post or this ad is about, was it
Social issues.
Political? You also have to do that?
No.
No?
No, because
Okay.
fuck it, it's not.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
selling,
not.
I'm selling
It's your
kins.
business, yeah.
You're telling me
Yeah.
that's social, fuck you. Like, okay, but so that the ads and products being flagged is still okay. After a while, I think I kind of got used to it. Flag it, review it. A human will come and see it.
Yeah.
The human will say that fuck it, it's not sexual.
Yeah.
And then they will approve it.
It's more a failure of their algorithm that it's flagging you, or that too many people are complaining, because also the algorithm shouldn't be showing your ad to people who don't or who are homophobic, right? That's Facebook supposedly incredibly powerful algorithm creating echo chambers. It should only be showing your ad to people who are supported.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other? Yeah.
Right, so the products one is fine, but what happened was in November last year, 2020, my ad account was suspended. And I was like, what? And so the office, again, Facebook is being very vague with the reasons.
Your ad account got
My ad
suspended.
account was just suspended. And they told me that there was a payment issue with my card. So I was like, oh shit, like did it cross the limit? Because credit cards and debit cards have limits and stuff. So I went to check my bank records and stuff, and there was nothing. And in fact, they just managed to successfully deduct the ad fees. And then after that, they suspended it. So it took 2 weeks for them to resolve. And as you know, November is kind of the peak retail period.
Yeah.
So that kind of costed, like that was the point where I felt like, oh shit, it is costing me actual money. And eventually what happened was my account was suspended. Somehow they asked me to upload my personal NRIC to verify my identity. Again, I'm not sure how this relates to a payment failure, but somehow coincidentally, they also asked me to do that. And so I did. Because what else can I do?
Usually that step is only, like, again, for New Narrative, because we have to check that box that says this post is on political, electoral, social issues. And in order to do those sort of posts, you have to be personally verified. That's part of what Facebook's trying to do. So I had to upload my ID to show that I am a real person and I'm the person paying for this ad. And my colleague in KL does the ads in Malaysia and so you have to pay for it in the local currency and be a local person. But that shouldn't be the case for you.
It shouldn't, but it happened. And coincidentally, after I've uploaded my NRIC and they've sort of verified my identity, my ad account was reinstated. Suddenly, the payment issue was no longer an issue. So I have no idea what's happening. Facebook is being very vague when I ask them, hey, what's up? What's happening? But based on what I've heard, my account wasn't the first LGBT account that was made to like upload such.
And this is just on Facebook. Do you get similar problems with Instagram?
It's the same. Facebook is Instagram, so like when
Instagram.
when it's suspended, both it's suspended on both sides.
Oh, okay, all right.
So that's like, that's the moment when I realized that am I under the radar now? And like, am I in the radar now?
On the radar.
Are people like watching me? But yeah, so that was a moment where I felt like, wow, okay.
So since we're on the topic of big business here, right? And you're a business owner yourself, do you think representation of the community or any marginalized community by big businesses is kind of just pandering to the community? Because what I'm hearing right now is that on the surface, Facebook can say, whoa, we're inclusive, come up with stickers and rainbow badges and profile filters, right? And then actually still make it really difficult for LGBTQIA businesses or pages to run. Do you think it's possible for big corporations to honestly and genuinely do something for the community?
Before I answer that, I have to say that I am aware that Facebook has to adhere to regulations given by the state. And that's something I've heard from some of the people who work there, that it's not as if they're these big evil guys trying to like take down LGBT accounts, but they just have to adhere to, if they think that something falls within a certain category that they're given, they just have to do it.
But it's the same basis on which Facebook is forced to adhere to POFMA, for example, or forced to take down new narratives posts because the either the elections department or IMDA issued a takedown order. They have to do that. Yeah.
I can sort of understand it a bit more if we're talking about POFMA or Wake Up Singapore, but LGBTQIA issues are just, that's something that you need to just take a stand on. And Facebook appears to, at least on the surface, have taken a stand on. It's not about any particular political affiliations. This is basic like human rights, like this is so fundamental, right?
It does prove the argument that LGBTQ people are discriminated against in Singapore when you can even do it on this regulatory basis, right? Lee Hsien Loong can say all he wants, we don't enforce 377A, there's no discrimination, but it's nonsense. It's quite clear that there is not just discrimination on a societal and personal level, but a systemic institutional and regulatory level when stuff like this happens.
So do you think it's possible?
I think it depends on the intent of the companies. And that's the problem, because for us and consumers or people who are not involved in the campaigns, we can never know what the true intent was. So there are examples of huge companies doing huge things in a positive way. And there are examples of companies who kind of like fucked it up. So one good example is Netflix. They have basically changed the game of LGBTQ representation in Singapore. If you think back before to pre-Netflix era, we used to watch like cable TV, which does not have representation. Right? It gets censored. It gets R21. Oh fuck, they can't air it. Then Netflix came in and they have all they impose their own R21 ratings and so on. But almost every show that you watch on Netflix has some form of representation, LGBTQ representation. And this is an example where it's not as if that is their agenda. Like, they were not trying to push anything. They just have it. And they came into Singapore with the content that they already have. And wow, like, first time, like, I can watch a children's cartoon that have like asexual people or like lesbian couples, lesbian characters. It's like, it's crazy. So this is one example where Netflix is huge.
If I can jump in again though, the converse is also still true here, because if I remember correctly, in 2019, Singapore was responsible for half of all of Netflix takedowns, withdrawals of shows globally, right? They had I can't remember how many, but half around the world where they were forced to withdraw a show from their service for a certain market, and half of those withdrawals came from Singapore alone.
And if I remember correctly, it was because of like drugs or cannabis or related.
Yeah.
I mean,
But smoking
that's a
is
whole
fine,
other
violence is fine, drinking is fine.
Yeah. But so I think this is an example that shows that the state actually is kind of powerful, and I think we are all aware of that. That even a huge company like Netflix, I mean, no choice, right? They want to do business in Singapore, they have to follow the rules.
Yeah.
And so they, in instances of takedown, whatever the government requests, they have to comply with. And I think, but besides those takedowns, they have done an amazing job, and it might not even be intentional, but there's just so much more representation now. So Netflix is an example of like a huge company that has really done largely positive stuff, like RuPaul's Drag Race. It's crazy. My cousin watches RuPaul's Drag Race, and she's like, "Oh my god, I'm so into it. I like this queen. I like that queen." And I was like, she understands.
How old is your cousin?
Around the same age as me, I think slightly younger.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, right. So it really has a big impact, and I think other examples of good examples are when companies run ads that feature LGBTQ experiences. The most recent one, I think, is a Doritos ad that featured a father who asked Reddit for help because he thinks his son is gay, but he thinks the son is afraid to come out to him.
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
Right, so that's an example where it's really heartwarming. And it's like a good kind of representation where it shows the real life struggles that people have. Another example is Gillette. I think it's last year or something, where they had an ad that had a trans man's first time shaving, and his dad helped him. And it's just like, you don't get that 10 years ago, I think. And so those are examples where when you watch it, and if people do watch it, it really changes the perspective of what it means to be like LGBTQ. And they just realize that they're just humans.
I mean, okay, I think the counter argument to this would be that it creates a situation in which, a person's struggles or a community struggles only become interesting insofar as they are profitable, right? So companies are kind of just jumping onto whatever gets clicks, whatever helps them make sales, right? Whereas for communities that are affected but are not as profitable, so for example, for sex workers or for trans people or for some people caught in the intersections of identities that put them in very, very precarious and silenced places, companies are not going to step in. So do you think that that's kind of a problem?
I think that is...
Are we leaning too much on companies and the state to push change? Do you think that's...
I think so. When it comes to private companies having representation, money is always in the equation. So they cannot justify, or it's going to be hard for them to justify having a certain thing that might not be profitable. Again, they are private business, right?
Yeah.
Or public listed, say. But essentially, I think what's interesting is the fact that these so-called private companies, entities, are taking the step at increasing representation. As opposed to something that maybe the state does. And if you think about it, because social issues are huge, and it requires a lot of like funding.
Yeah.
And who else has the money? The government has the money. Huge private companies have the money. A lot of like large scale ads and stuff, like individuals, like small individuals can't really do on their own. So that is definitely a problem where if we were to look at all these private company or like company driven initiatives, there's always going to be a problem of they're doing it for the money, which is like, sure, of course they're doing it for the money.
Yeah.
But the other thing to think about is it better off with or without that representation? Because the alternative is not as if, oh, then the government will come and do it. They're not going to do it. So what do we have left if these companies or if these ads don't exist? If Netflix doesn't have LGBTQ representation, what are we left with? We're left with like Singapore 10 years ago, which basically is like SCV.
Yeah.
And you watch all those like highly censored, very boring shows. So that isn't a easy answer. And I know that there are a lot of like perspectives on like, oh, capitalism as a driving force for social change can be problematic. And it can be.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we have to also take a look at what is the landscape that we are working in. Sort of like, what game are we playing? Idealistically, capitalism might not be the best thing that is driving social change.
Yeah.
But given that we live in such a highly capitalist society, not only Singapore, but basically the whole world, right? Like, what is the best option? And then suddenly this becomes like something that might be a bit more viable. Although conceptually I do get why people might think that, hey, it's still problematic, which is true. And there are examples of like bad, sort of like forced LGBT representation. An example is the Royal Albatross cruise, where they sort of like tried to hold an LGBT event of sorts. And then it turns out that they were only after the so-called rich gay and lesbian people.
Yeah.
And then they insulted the trans community.
Okay.
And it was kind of fucked up. Like they basically, I'm not sure how much you all know about this, but they use the term like trashy transsexuals. Basically, they asked the platform that was promoting it, like, by the way, do you all have trans people? Cause we only want the rich gay and lesbian. We don't want the trashy transsexuals. Something like that. Right. So first of all, transsexual is an outdated term. Like, get educated. Second one, like, you're just insulting. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So this is an example where it's not genuine. They were just really grabbing the pink dollar, and it's quite obvious. Like, after they ask the questions, they're like, "Oh wow, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
So there was like backlash over that.
So to what extent do you think the community can hold companies accountable, right? Because you gave a very good, nice, balanced answer, right? Which is idealistically, the system of capitalism and capitalism-driven activism would stop. But we don't live in that world. We live in hyper-capitalist, late capitalism of the 21st century, right? So a nice sort of middle ground would be that if the community could really hold these companies accountable. So right now where we are, to what extent do you think the people, the market, the community, the people who are actually everyday people can hold these companies accountable, take them to task?
I think there are examples in Singapore where the companies were successfully held accountable.
Okay.
So one example is the cruise, where there was backlash. People just boycotted them. And so that was an example where the community was basically outraged at how they were just blatantly grabbing the pink dollar. Another example is there was also a local bookstore and cafe that for a couple of years have been branding themselves as very pro-LGBT. But what happened was, towards the end of last year, the owner called the police on 3 of the trans ex staff for seemingly trivial stuff. And anyone who is a bit aware of LGBTQ issues will know that trans folks don't exactly work well with the police because of like a bunch of issues. They might get misgendered, they might get dead named, basically meaning they are called the birth name or the name that they were given at birth instead of what name they want. And a bunch of other issues. And the context of calling the cops on such trivial matters just seemed really out of proportion.
Yeah.
And so there was kind of a backlash as well.
Mm-hmm.
And people were basically outraged at how could you claim to be pro-LGBTQ but decide that calling the cops on your ex-staff, trans ex-staff, like how is that acceptable?
Yeah.
And so the community kind of also like held them accountable, and there was a backlash. And I think if you think a bit further back in July last year, what happened with MediaCorp, there was also backlash when people realized that they actually had a very homophobic portrayal of a gay character in one of the Channel 8 TV series. And so when everyone realized that, again, outrage, like why we were in 2020, how can it be that this kind of like stereotypes still exist in local TV shows? And so everyone took them responsible. MediaCorp kind of tried to apologize. They got it right the third time. And so like, you know, to some extent, people are taking them to account, and it happens when people realize that what they were told wasn't true. So to some extent, I think that it's kind of working, and social media has helped in a large way, because you don't actually have to be in person. You don't actually have to have a connection to the people involved to have your opinion anymore.
So I mean, while we're on the topic here of discussing these very broad and sort of abstract issues, right? Can you tell us more about your blog, right? Because your blog is a space that really, really discusses these fundamental, kind of tricky, multifaceted questions, right? And I also just want to ask, you do the blog, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like suspiciously well done. Like there are
Thank
graphics for every article.
Oh,
there
yes.
are article series. There's a ton of research done. They are really well polished, right? I mean, I remember looking at blogs in general, right, from my old jobs or from other NGOs. The blog is often like an SEO machine, right? It's just there to make the website pop up on Google search, right? But your website, your blog is a real treasure trove of information. So I'm just wondering, first of all, how do you do that? And then number two, what are you trying to achieve with it, right?
So the fact that I was a UX designer helped a lot in terms of the design of the whole brand. So I design everything, I Photoshop, edit everything, and including the blog. Again, I'm kind of like a perfectionist. So I do think that, and again, it's a very designer thing to say, but I think that a well-designed cover image catches the attention of audiences more than a lot of blogs think. And if you have, especially on Facebook, you know, that thumbnail will show up.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of like blogs, I guess, don't focus so much on the cover image. But me being a designer, me being like a perfectionist, I care a lot. So I spend a lot of time, sometimes maybe too much time, on designing the cover images of the blog post. And part of the reason why I could do that is because the sort of the cadence for the blog is around once a month. It's not like, oh, publish 3 articles a week, right? And the sort of philosophy or the concept I went for was that I would publish in-depth, super good articles. Okay, a bit way paiseh.
No, but I mean, you're taking the time out to do them, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm not wrong, that's not optimized, right? You want to do like once a week or slightly more than once a week, but you're doing once a month kind
Once
of
a
thing.
month.
So your philosophy is to focus on the quality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So, okay, I have to say, I was a bit inspired by Last Week Tonight. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the show.
Yes, of course, yes.
Right. So, John Oliver does 1 show a week, which is uncommon. Like, in America, they do it every day. And his way of doing it is to just spend a fuck ton of time researching, developing a story, and he does it once a week, and it's like fucking good.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like my inspiration for the blog. I want to do something that is like once a month, because that's the time I can allocate. But I want to do it and make sure that it's really good. And I think that, at least for me, that kind of makes more sense than trying to churn out multiple blog posts that may not be so good.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like why I decided to go with something that's a lot more in-depth and a lot more effort required.
So where do you get the ideas and the inspiration for the content, right? Because I started out getting to know about Heckin Unicorn mainly through the memes, right? And they were really good kind of clapbacks where, you know, you really point out the crux of the flaws in the other person's logic, right? In anti-LGBTQIA person's logics, right? And then now with the blog, you also have a lot of very interesting content tackling issues that I never thought about, right? So, I mean, one of them that I really liked was conversion therapy in Singapore. I didn't know that it made it to our shores. I thought this was like a redneck American South kind of thing, right? And then another one was the debate between the bisexual community and the pansexual community. So these are like, there's a debate, you know, like, so where do you get the inspiration or the spark for the content for your memes as well as for your blog?
Right. So for the memes or for the comics, the approach is slightly different. So it's more like, it's more built for social media. It's meant to be lightweight. It's meant to be consumed in a matter of seconds because there's only like 4 to 6 panels. And it tends to be a bit more lighthearted. So poke fun at things that don't really make sense, double standards and stuff. And ultimately it helps queer people laugh at things that actually hurts, but like, fuck it, we're gonna laugh about it. So that's kind of the approach for the cartoon or the comics. For the blog, it's more in-depth, and it's intentionally in-depth, and it's supposed to help increase awareness of LGBTQ issues, mainly in Singapore, but sometimes I also write about not just about Singapore stuff. And the idea for that is, I think, unfortunately, we are still at a stage where a lot of people are still sort of in denial in the sort of like they don't think that discrimination is happening or is real against
they
the
can't
LGBTQ.
see it, right? It doesn't happen to them. They can't see it. They think it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
but
it doesn't help that our politicians, I wouldn't say lie, but say stuff that may not align with my personal experiences of what it means to live as a gay person or as a queer person in Singapore.
Yeah, I mean, I think our politicians also don't see the discrimination and don't believe. I don't think they're lying. I think they genuinely don't believe it exists because these are very privileged people, right? And they can't see a lot of this happening, so they just assume it doesn't happen. Or there are systems and institutions to deal with it, so they assume it's being dealt with. But that's not true at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't translate to actual, change on the ground. Yeah.
So the blog is, the main objective is to raise awareness of issues, and so I have like a Trello board of ideas of what I could write about. And a lot of these were like, it always starts off as like, oh, bi versus pan. Because I know about this because of Heckin Unicorn, and I've seen, because I follow a lot of LGBTQ accounts, and a lot of them are not in Singapore. So a lot of this discourse has been happening on social media, and people raise it up to me, and then I realize, oh shit, people are actually debating and arguing about this. So some of them come from like what I've seen on social media. A lot of them have just been about, okay, what are the different forms of like atrocities happening to the queer community in Singapore. And so the first one we wrote about was IMDA censorship of LGBTQ content. And then the follow-up was a huge one about basically trying to be exhaustive of all of the anti-LGBTQ regulations. It's probably not all, but it's kind of it's a lot. And then also conversion therapy. So conversion therapy was a bit more personal because, again, I like you, right? I did not think that it exists in Singapore. And what happened was, I've only heard rumors and like anecdotes. And so to me, it's like, it's gonna be just like some very, very, very extreme cases. And then I realized that one of my friends, their parents forced them to attend conversion therapy sessions. And I was like, fuck.
Wow.
They're just my friend, and I could not tell at all. And so it then occurred to me that this normal quote unquote normal people, everyday people that we see in our lives, their parents could be forcing them to sort of like change their identity or feel guilty about who they are. And so that was a moment where it became real for me, like, oh shit, actually there are people who are going through that. And it's very selfish because like it's very like privileged.
Yeah.
I only didn't think it's real because I've never known anyone. And the moment I knew someone like that, I feel like personally attacked or personally affected.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people probably think. Like they just don't think it's an issue until someone they care about experiences that. And so yeah, that was what motivated me to do a lot of research about like conversion therapy in Singapore.
So, I mean, regarding the skills that you would need to pick up to run this very multifaceted business, right? How did you pick those up? Because I'm thinking right now, you have a blog, right? The memes I can understand, the illustration I can understand because you were a designer, right? But the blog, you have a wonderful byline, wonderful narrative structure. It's all put together very nicely, right? And then there's we're going to talk about it in a bit, a library coming out.
Right.
So for all the peripheral skills that come along with running such a multifaceted business, how do you pick those up?
So the
Or
fact
how difficult was it to pick those up?
the fact that I was a nerd helped.
Okay.
So
Please
I'm
elaborate,
a
yeah.
designer, so I'm in touch with the creative side of things. But I also studied accounting, and I love numbers. Okay, I don't love it. I can do it. I love physics. So I'm also very in tune with the logical part of things. And I've also picked up coding. Coding is amazing. It's so fun. So I
That'll be the
think
first person I've heard say that.
it's very fun.
Coding is fun.
Really?
It is amazing.
I don't know, it scares me. But okay,
I
let's...
mean, it's tough.
Essentially, you create something out of nothing. And wow, it's just like, okay.
So what's the back end of your site? Do you use a CMS?
So for Heckin Unicorn, I use Shopify,
Right.
which is an e-commerce platform.
Okay.
So I don't have to care about a lot of the back-end stuff.
But then the blog and all the other stuff that Shopify also provides that?
Yeah, Shopify
Okay.
does.
Okay.
I do like edit some of the HTML, JavaScript, CSS on the site to more of like the prettifying it,
Right. Okay.
changing the style, not how it actually works in the background.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess I was just lucky. Like I'm kind of in tune with both the creative side as well as the more logical, number-centric coding side. And my experiences in my previous jobs really helped because as a designer, I also learned coding. I also like push code to production before. All these kind of like accumulated, and I found myself in a position where I could create and customize and brand a website on my own. I could write because again, like I was shameless plug, I was in the USP program in NUS.
What's that?
It is a semi-elitist program.
University Scholars Program.
Yes,
right?
we are not all scholarship holders. That's just the name that they give. But it's an amazing program, and my writing just like changed after I've been through the foundational writing module, and like my the way I think just changed. So that really helped in terms of like how I write.
Okay.
Of course, my brother helps. Like he helps to check the grammar. He helps to edit. He suggests like, this sentence, like what are you saying? Things like that. So it's not like really just one person.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just like all those stuff, and I like reading up on like legal statutes.
Wow.
Especially
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, okay. So I'm not sure whether you're aware that gay marriage is not allowed in Singapore, and
yeah.
it's not
Yeah, I think
because
pretty well aware.
not because it just did not include gay marriage. It's explicitly voided.
Oh, it's codified.
Yes.
Okay, that I didn't.
Right. So like when I found it out, I was like, what the fuck?
So
that's
somebody
something-
actually took the time to write an extra line there.
Yes.
No two of the same sex.
It's a very interesting history because it didn't occur because they were specifically against gay marriage. It was, if I remember correctly, it was because we started having gender affirmation surgery in the 70s, and then there was a case in the 90s where a couple got married and one of them had had transitioned to a different gender without telling the other partner, right? So I think it was a man who transitioned to a woman on, officially changed their gender, and then married a man. And then when the man found out, he sued. And so that's why they changed the law to specifically void marriages. I think you'll have to help me here because I can't remember the exact details now.
I think it's the same sex, basically.
They I think it's specifically, the law specifically says marriage must be between one man and one woman. And is it based? It doesn't have to be based on their birth IC, right? But
so there are specific
birth
lines that actually say that if a person legally transitions, that will be the sort of the sex that the law will look at. So if a trans man legally transitions and is legally recognized as a man, he can marry a woman. That's fine.
Okay.
So there are clauses that are like, in a way, a bit trans affirming. But there's also that law that explicitly voids same-sex marriage, even if you got married overseas. So like, you can get married in the US or whatever, you come back, sorry, it's not counted.
Yeah, I think there have been couples who, there was one couple, I think, was it the Cheongs, who were blogging about their experience being having gotten married overseas, came back to Singapore, and then only one of them had rights over their daughter because she had carried the daughter for pregnancy and the other hadn't, and then there were all sorts of problems. And I think they've left Singapore now because they just found it too difficult.
Right, yeah.
So, so speaking about, Singapore's LGBT history, let's talk about the library that you've started. Yeah, you're quite proud about that. What is the Unicorn Library?
Right, so the Unicorn Library is a place where people can borrow books to read for free. And all of the books are LGBTQ books. So
give us a sampling of that. What are some interesting titles or ideas in these books?
Right, so
what does Singapore's LGBT
it's not
literature scene look like?
There are a lot of books written by Singapore authors that are about queer experiences, but not all of the books are Singaporean authors.
Okay.
There is a collection of like so one of the books is called Peculiar Crease.
Okay.
And it was published in the 1990s, 1992 or something. And when it was published, it was Singapore's first gay novel. And when I read it I think last year. So that was how long? 2-3 decades after it was published. I could still feel like connected to the story, because for me it felt like it was the first time there was this gay character based in Singapore, and his experiences about love, lust, sex and stuff. And so I felt like, oh shit, like this was the first time I felt truly represented in a work of fiction. There are a lot of things that were a bit outdated in terms of like how things were back then. But even if you read it now, you would still find similarities, which is sad, which means that things have not changed that much. Because I still felt like some of the things that were mentioned, some of the themes, like how it's taboo, how they have to go into hiding, or the kind of struggles they face, I still feel like it exists today.
Okay. So how does this library work then?
So it's very simple. It's theunicornlibrary.com. So you go there, you browse the collection of books that we have, you borrow, reserve a book. It gets sent to you via mail, track mail. So you actually know when it arrives.
Okay.
And you take it out of the mail, you read it for 30 days. There is a return envelope inside with the postage that is paid, with a return address already pre-filled. All you have to do is put the book into the return mailer and drop it off.
So it's the original Netflix model.
Yes.
Yeah.
Essentially, everything is just online.
Yeah.
You don't have to go to a special collection point, and you just return it seamlessly.
Nice. Doesn't it cost you though?
It does.
'Cause- Oh, okay.
It's a loss making thing. Because
Okay.
like the postage will cost money.
Oh, wait. So this is free.
It's free. As in, you have to pay a small deposit, but you get
Okay, for the
refunded the
book, right.
deposit just
Okay.
in case you lose it or in
Wow.
case like. But it's a loss making kind of thing, and like obviously, right, libraries are loss making.
Yeah.
They don't make money. So the idea is that I think more people should be reading queer novels, queer books, and it's just you just have a different feeling when you feel represented in a work of fiction, and it's just like magical. And some of the books are really good. The Picture of Dorian Gray, it's an old book, but it's so good. I love it. Oscar Wilde, it's written by Oscar Wilde. He's so good at writing. And I think that, and funny thing is, he was actually convicted of a law that is very similar to 377A in Singapore. He was sent to 2 years of hard labor. And essentially that law kind of, you can trace it back to, you can trace 377A back to that, the clause of gross indecency. So Oscar Wilde, is an era of black and white footage. But in Singapore, 377A is still around. Say something about how much we have progressed.
How we've progressed. So what gave you
But
the idea?
if I can also just try and be a bit optimistic, the fact is we just discussed marriage being redefined twice in Singapore's history, right? First, the Women's Charter in 1968, but then redefined again as one man and one woman in 1996 or so, or was it 1992, around there, which means marriage can be redefined again in the future. So we are a place also where the government has been willing to take radical steps against public opinion, or sometimes, despite public opinion, in order to do things which they believe are right. In this case, of course, they're on the wrong side of history, but hopefully eventually they will come around, or a successor government will come around. But there is, the fact that we went from a country of polygamy to marriage defined as two people, that was a huge step in the 1960s, even if that rule didn't apply to certain, religious groups. And then we redefined it again in 90s. We can redefine it again today. So there is hope, right? And we just need to keep fighting and pushing, and things can change.
So how did you get the idea for the Unicorn Library?
I was trying to figure out what are some projects that Heckin Unicorn can take on that may not be profitable, that also help the LGBTQ community in Singapore. And I think the library is kind of a nice thing because I like reading, and I think a lot of queer people find comfort in reading these novels. And so it's just a nice kind of overlap between something that you need money on, it's loss making, so not everyone can do, but at the same time it also helps provide some sort of like comfort for people. And so this was an idea.
But why the library? I mean, pardon my ignorance, but are these books not available in the national library system? Because as far as I am aware, Singapore doesn't officially ban books anymore, apart from the Watchtower and pornography, right? So these books should be in the national library system, are they not?
I think they are. Most of them are.
Okay.
But again, you're talking about maybe because of COVID. If it's at a physical library, you actually have to go down to borrow it.
Right.
So there's a lot of hassle involved. You have to go down and borrow it. You have to make sure you return it at the library on time. So you have to travel again.
Yeah.
And I think that additional hassle might cause people to not be as keen in terms of like borrowing a book. And so this is, I've just started it, so I'm not sure how many people are interested in borrowing the books. But if there's a way that's a lot more seamless, a lot less hassle, people might be more interested. And like if it comes with a slight cost, Heckin Unicorn can bear a bit of the cost for now.
And I think it'd just be nice to have all the books kind of nicely curated and in one place. So I love that. I know your time and schedule is very tight, but are there any new projects that you're working on? Anything that you're Any new directions that you'd like to see Heckin Unicorn head in the future?
Besides, I think there's nothing much planned besides the Unicorn Library. But I am actually looking up for an intern.
Oh, all right. Okay. So if anybody's interested.
Yes. I finally realized that I need some help.
How should they make that
I think
happen?
so, yes.
So if somebody was interested, how should they make that happen?
Right. So you can go to bit.ly/unicorn intern.
All small letters.
Yes, all small letters. And you'll find a page
We'll
with
put it in
the
the
job
show notes.
description.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So would you like Heckin Unicorn to become a big business, to expand and expand and expand? Or would you like to keep it small, close to the way it is right now?
I would want it to be successful in terms of again, it's a business.
Yeah.
So I want it to be as big as it can get. But I'm also aware that the bigger it gets, the more problems or the trickier things will get in terms of ensuring that it's still the same thing as what it started out as. It's a fine line, but I think Heckin Unicorn is at a stage where I still want to grow it. It has not reached the point where I'm worried about losing direction or losing its way.
Yeah.
And I think it would be pretty cool if a queer local brand gets so big that the government can't help but take notice that this sort of entrepreneurship works out too.
Yeah.
And all those, they give out those awards for don't know what new business. Oh, so cool. And since when is there ever a queer brand that?
Yeah.
So I think it would be cool if it's successful. But I'm also aware that the bigger I get or the bigger Heckin Unicorn gets, the more problems it might face. Especially when I start having more stuff, which again is just me for now. Yeah.
And you do all the packing and the delivery. So you physically walk to the post office to send all your pins and stuff.
So I used to do that, but right now I'm using DHL and they will pick up the packages. But I
okay.
still pack them.
Yeah.
So after I pack them, they will come over to collect the packages and then they will handle it. But for local items, local orders, I will just drop it off the mailbox.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of work.
It is.
All right. So I want to just end off with the big question that we throw to all of our guests at the end. The big philosophical question. What's your theory of change? How do you think change will happen? How it should happen? Or how you see yourself pushing for change in Singapore?
So this is tough, of course.
Yeah. That's why we keep it for the last one.
I have some thoughts, but I have to say that again, I'm not an expert in this, so it's just my personal thoughts, and I might not have devoted as much attention into thinking about
but
this.
it's more about how you are trying to create change, right?
Right.
So it's not about the theory of change, it's your theory of change.
Yeah.
Because quite clearly you want to see change in Singapore, and I think you're very much hoping that what you're doing will create change. So it's really more about asking you to codify what you're doing into a process,
Right.
at least theoretically. Whether it works or not, none of us will know. Whether new narrative Wake Up Singapore works, we don't know. But what is sort of the theory behind what you're trying to do?
So I have a few thoughts about this. One of them is about civil disobedience.
Okay.
And my personal take is that it's not going to work in Singapore. And I think we've seen enough evidence to suggest that, hey, this model is not going to work in Singapore because of how powerful the state is, or because of how they tend to react to such instances of disobedience. So my personal take is that it's not going to work. And if you look at maybe the US history of LGBT activism, a lot of it has to do with some form of civil disobedience, rioting, the Stonewall, whatever. My personal take is that Singapore is very different and that it may not work out well.
I mean, if I can jump in, there are degrees of civil disobedience, right? And this comes back to something I was talking about recently about James C. Scott's Weapons of the Weak, right? Which is a theory about how people who have very little power in relation to the state resist the state. And so, unlike in the, say in the US, where you have riots, protests, and sit-ins, our level of civil disobedience has to extend to things like foot dragging, just acting blur, acting stupid, just being pretending to be lazy, or just being lazy. So one example is how we responded to Trace Together and refused to download the app. Nothing's more easy for all of us with smartphones than downloading app. But instead, Singaporeans are like, no, we don't want to download the app. That is an act of a collective act of civil disobedience, which I was quite amazed by, how Singaporeans have lost trust in the government, that all of us just like, no, we're not going to download this app. Okay, you force us, we're going to get the token. And then the government's like, wait, what? All we want the token? But we don't have enough tokens. So suddenly they're forced to delay. And then this skepticism was then proved, right? Because we're recording this on the 16th of January, and just 2 weeks ago, it was shown that the government has been abusing our trust. So civil disobedience has to be, I think, calibrated to the context in which it exists. And so civil disobedience for Singapore will have to be very small acts that are, ways of resisting an overpowerful state.
Right.
So just, it also takes the form where the government wants you to fill out forms or something like that, and you're like, I don't understand, I fill out the form badly, this sort of lack of cooperation, or just working slowly. The government says we want to achieve X by 2021 or whatever, and people are like, no, I don't think we will. We're not going to care about that, right? So I just want to calibrate what you're saying, right? Civil disobedience in a sort of US model where there's a lot more personal freedom is not going to work here.
Yeah.
But we have our own ways of doing things.
So what will work then?
Yeah, what will work?
I think so. What has worked, I think, is having more wholesome, genuine LGBTQ representation. Again, I know there are existing regulations that kind of block that from happening, but it has been proven that the more representation you have, the more positive society tends to view LGBTQ issues. So that's one dimension that it's almost a sure win. In terms of like, if we get more, will it help? Very likely, yes.
Yeah.
How do we get there is another question. There's also a factor of generational change. So as we know, the younger people tend to be more accepting of diversity. They tend to be more anti-discrimination. And so when they become of age to vote, that may result in some pressure. And again, I know that Singapore has a birth problem where younger generations are getting smaller and smaller in number. Does that change things? I'm not sure, but the general trend is pretty clear. The younger folks, they don't care about discrimination, or they just don't want it. And so that has a very slow and painful, but it's a way where change is happening. And I think it's also have to do with the things that they are exposed to. So again, like, it kind of like fits in back to representation. What kind of things do they see online? What kind of shows do they watch? And it really affects how they think or how they perceive these kind of issues. So there's a small feedback loop there. The question of how can we make it faster? So obviously Heckin Unicorn is a bet. In terms of a longer term view, can a corporation or a company also advocate for change? I don't know. I hope it does. I hope it could, but like I have no idea. So there's an example where if Heckin Unicorn could be something a lot bigger, if we could invest in some of these kind of things that might help accelerate change. I mean, we're not there yet, but eventually if we could, then that could be a way that change could happen. And so those are some examples. I think there are also other things that we can consider. So we have a tendency in Singapore, I think, to think about to think that change only happens when the state gets involved. So we kind of wait for the state to do stuff. And I think some politicians said before, if you want to make change, come join us, something like that. And I think it may not be true. Like, you don't actually have to be an MP or a minister to make change happen. And people are starting to be aware that in their own capacity, they can make change happen. Heckin Unicorn is one example, right? It's just me. I started a company. and then like some small change has happened. And so if we kind of like step away from the mindset that only the state can make this change happen, and again, I understand why they think like that, because they are powerful, but there are things that as individuals we can also change. So for example, if you can call out anti-LGBT behaviors amongst your friends, that's going to be huge. If you can take companies or departments of the government or people, hold them accountable for things that they've done that are anti-LGBT, that's going to be huge. So I think a lot of people are starting to realize that they have small power, but collectively it can be quite powerful. Maybe that's a form of civil disobedience. That is like, it's a way of doing things, making your views heard, that is still in line with what the law permits. And I think maybe what I meant was that Singapore's laws are very different from American laws.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And so what actions we can do that's still in line with the law is very different. But there are things that we can do as like private individuals.
So just one last thing, if you have one big piece of advice for anybody out there who may be thinking of or inspired to start an LGBT business or any business that's
Activism oriented.
Activism oriented, social justice oriented, what's that one crown piece of advice you'd give them?
Wow.
From all your years and your experience, what's the one thing that you'd like to tell them?
Okay, so the context of this advice is that they're going to be running a business. And my advice is to make sure you know how to get it profitable. Assumption is that they are not going to get any funding. They're not going to, have any grants. They need to know what is the path to being profitable. If they can't figure that out, they're going to struggle. And if they are struggling, they cannot advocate.
How does one begin to find out a path to profitability?
This is a tough question because a lot of companies still haven't figured it out. But so I run an e-commerce store, and it's a lot more straightforward. You have the cost of production, you have the cost of running your ads or whatever, and then you have the revenue. So it's just, do the numbers become positive?
Oh, okay.
Right,
So basically figure out, okay, this is the amount I need to sell to break
Yep.
even
Yep.
and then make a profit.
And again, e-commerce is a lot more straightforward. You have
Yeah.
companies like Netflix who are
Yeah.
still not profitable, but how do they figure it out? Who
Mhm.
knows?
Mm.
They're so huge. They're like so different. But basically, I think it's important. And I think in terms of like businesses that also advocate, probably they're going to be selling stuff like e-commerce related.
Yeah.
It's very important to get your numbers straight.
Mhm.
It sounds very boring, like
No, I totally agree. Like the one thing people ask me, like if you about new narrative, the same question that Sean just asked. My answer is get an accountant from the very beginning. Of course, you had that built-in advantage. You're already an accountant, and you could do the creative side. But for me, I'm terrible at numbers. I should have gotten an accountant right at the beginning, and also an admin manager, or there's a lot of paperwork, all that sort of thing. Whereas people who start businesses, I think, or at least in our field and in activism, we're more the creative side, the writing side, the idealistic side. So the numbers and the paperwork need to be taken care of. And I would say the pathway to profitability is understanding your customer and what they need and meeting that need.
right.
And that being able to answer that question very precisely, right? You actually answered that very well, because you like, there's no good LGBTQ friendly lifestyle brand, and you're trying to build one, right? And when I want, like, I love your pins, and if I wanted a pin, I would go straight to you because you're meeting that need. And so that's the actual need you're filling, and that's great.
Right. Oh, another advice. Sorry,
Yeah.
cheating.
Yeah,
No,
go for it.
please.
Is to start small. And so like there's a tendency to look at existing companies or existing accounts and be like, fuck, they're like huge now. And you feel like you're small. But you should remember that all of these accounts, all of these companies, they started out small. Right? And you don't see them because obviously they're small.
Yeah.
You only get to see them when they are somewhat big.
Yeah.
And so like just start small.
Mm-hmm.
When I created my first batch, the first customers are my friends. A
Yeah.
bit cheating, but they are my friends. And then like, you know, it slowly grow from there. So don't feel like you have to go out huge
Yeah.
and have like a
dump
huge
a ton of
no.
money in it. No.
Especially when you're running a business,
Mhm.
right? If you know who you're targeting, you start small first.
Mm.
That's how all businesses work. You don't have to feel like, oh my god, I'm so small. Like, what am I doing?
Mm.
That's what all of us
Yeah.
like go through basically.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking that, you know, I have no business sense whatsoever. But I'm thinking, you know, let's say if I was forced to build a business, you know, I'm looking at companies like Uber or WeWork. They throw just a shit ton of money at the company and hope it floats, right? That seems to be like the model, right? And you're telling us the opposite now.
Even if you look at Uber, when they started out, it was a very different product. It was like a black car thing. It was extremely elite,
Mm-hmm.
small,
Yeah.
small scale. Facebook started out small,
Mm.
like very niche campus,
Mm-hmm.
problematic, but but they started out really small. And so like now these companies are huge, but
Yeah.
if you trace it back, they always start small.
Mm.
So and they were successful because they nailed the first small group of people.
Yeah.
And basically, like, you just need to be aware that whatever you're starting, it will always start small. Unless you're like a multi-millionaire, then go big.
You can afford to like
Yeah.
throw a lot of money into it. Like what was that streaming service? Yeah, Chibi, that really dumb service that threw in like billions of
Oh, right,
dollars
right.
and then folded within a year.
Right,
You know,
yeah,
that sort of prove the concept and then grow, I think
Yeah,
is what
yeah,
you're saying. Yeah.
Mhm. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, Yusheng. This has been really, really enlightening.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. I learned today that the unicorn does not say "oh heck." He says something else. But anyway, this was very enlightening, and I hope that you have learned, all of you out there have learned a lot about business, about Heckin Unicorn. Please go and follow them on Instagram and on social media, their Facebook page, check out their blog as well. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a really good time talking to you, and I've learned a lot. And I urge all our listeners to go check out your site and check out your blog. And so thank you for joining us. Thank you, Sean, for co-hosting as always. Thank you to our listeners, for all of you for joining us. And of course, when we're again talking about business, New Narrative desperately needs your support because we're entirely supported by members. No ads, no nothing else. So we really need you, and so if you'd like to join, please go to newnarrative.com/join. If you'd like to donate, go to newnarrative.com/donate. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about New Narrative, please check out this playlist up here. And if you'd like to watch episodes of Political Agenda, please check out this playlist down here. Thank you very much, and please help keep New Narrative sustainable and independent by joining as a member at newnarrative.com/join. Thank you.